We're back now after a short recess, and we will now hear the testimony in person of Lina Abu Akleh, the niece of Shireen Abu Akleh. Lina, during your testimony, the Commission would like to hear from you on the events following the killing of your aunt, including the funeral, and the efforts of your family to seek accountability for the killing of your aunt. So please, you may begin.
Thank you so much. Tomorrow marks 6 months since my aunt Shireen Abu Akleh was killed in Jenin while covering an Israeli raid. 6 months ago, I woke up to the most shocking and tragic news. I remember waking up to a phone call from my father telling me that Shireen has been injured. I frantically called her colleagues who, after a few minutes, told me that Shireen has been martyred. The grief, anger, sadness, and trauma that we as a family have had to endure and continue to endure is painful beyond words. We did not only lose a renowned journalist, but we lost our one and only aunt. My father lost his only sister. It's very difficult to put into words and to explain the suffering, but this is exactly what injustice feels like. The killing of Shireen could have been avoided if there was accountability for the countless crimes committed by the Israeli army in the past, or for the numerous journalists who were targeted and killed. Shireen wasn't the first journalist nor the last. Israel's assassination of Shireen falls into a long-standing and well-documented Israeli pattern of targeting and inciting against Palestinian journalists, and all journalists for that matter. All reputable organizations and media outlets that have conducted an investigation around the killing of Shireen concluded that an Israeli soldier killed her. Even the UN concluded so. Her colleague, Ali Smoudi, who was also with her, was injured in the shoulder, and fires continued to be shot towards the direction of Shireen even after she was bleeding on the floor, while her colleague and journalist, Shada Hanaisha, tried to reach out to help her. A young man from Jenin, Sharif, who bravely jumped in to help Shireen, was also fired at, which shows that even when she was bleeding, immediate medical care was prevented and they were shooting to kill. They were deliberately targeting my aunt. In previous instances, Shireen and her crew faced physical harassment by getting pushed away by the Israeli soldier while she was reporting. She's also stated, Shireen has stated, how in the previous videos, how there's always the probability that they would shoot you and say that it was by mistake, or to accuse you of doing something like attacking them and shooting you under that pretext. Very similar to what happened following her killing. The day Shireen was killed on May 11th, the Israeli police stormed our house in the early afternoon and tried to impose restrictions and constraints on how we as a family should mourn Shireen. They specifically asked for the Palestinian flags to be taken down. No gatherings in and outside the house, nor any national chants. Just to give like a context, the minute when the news broke out that Shireen was killed, we had so many people come to the house to pay their condolences and just to show support. So our house was filled with, there were so many people inside the house, outside the house, trying to support us in any way possible. These sort of restrictions was a form of intimidation and harassment, as they were trying to control how we should mourn Shireen. On May 12th, following the funeral procession that President Mahmoud Abbas hosted for Shireen in Ramallah, following that ceremony, Shireen's casket was being taken to the morgue at the hospital in East Jerusalem. On our way to Jerusalem, from Ramallah, the Israeli police blocked all the roads leading to the hospital. We were stuck and we weren't able to make it in there on time. That same day, my father was summoned by the Israeli police at a nearby station and was asked about the funeral procession that will be taking place the next day. They asked how many people will be attending, what's the path, and who will be attending. My father, who was present with lawyers, stated that this is not just a family funeral, but a funeral for the entire nation, and that we don't know how many people will be present. We never agreed upon anything. The day of the funeral, May 13, we had the Israeli police come to our house from the early morning and escorted us from the house all the way to the hospital. And they again asked to not have Palestinian flags raised on the cars or have it draped on the casket. When we arrived to the hospital, it felt like we were in a war zone with the number of police cars, skunk water truck, and mounted police. I recall many people, many family friends close to Shireen as well, were prevented from accessing the premises of the hospital and were not able to get inside. The moment Shireen's casket was taken out of the morgue and we were heading towards the hearse, we were attacked by heavily armed Israeli police. They used batons to beat the mourners and pallbearers, threw stun grenades at everyone and inside the hospital building. I was told by one of the police to move away or else I will get beaten. I knew a few who actually were hurt. I was taken inside the hospital to escape and find shelter, where I actually had a panic attack and was constantly asking if Shireen is okay and if they stole her casket, since this is something that happens. Only later to see videos and pictures of how her casket almost dropped, as that was their intention. We saw in the videos how Shireen, the pallbearers were being attacked on their legs, and this caused the casket to tilt and almost fall. The violence, the brutality, and the barbaric attack we experienced was beyond traumatic, and until this day we continue to suffer from the pain and the memories of what we experienced the day of the funeral. They removed the Palestinian flag that draped the casket and attacked the hearse when we were still in the hospital. I remember her casket arriving to church covered in shattered glass. I couldn't even put my hands on the casket. All roads leading to the church in the old city of Jerusalem were blocked with multiple checkpoints. It was very difficult for me and my family to make it to church, as we were stopped multiple times and faced with multiple questions to enter the church. So once we left the hospital, I remember they stopped us on the way and they asked us to show IDs to show that we are actually her family. And anyone who was behind our car was prevented from entering. People had to walk miles just to get to the church. And even in front of the church, there were multiple barriers. They weren't allowing anyone to enter. My father was almost 30 minutes to an hour late to the funeral mass because of the restrictions, and they stopped him so many times for a question. Many mourners were also asked by the Israeli police about their religious backgrounds before entering the church. All we wanted was to put Shireen to rest in peace, but even the day of her funeral, they killed her again and again. No one has been held accountable for the attack on the mourners and the funeral from that day. We continue our efforts in seeking justice, seeking accountability, and calling on all legal and political bodies with jurisdiction over Shireen's killing to carry out an independent, thorough, and transparent investigations and to hold all those up and down the chain of command responsible. As a family, we've had to relive this trauma every single day because of the lack of action and lack of justice to hold the perpetrators responsible. This tragic and sudden loss has taken toll on our mental, emotional, and physical well-being. We've had to shoulder the task of seeking justice for Shireen. While our loss is insurmountable and irreplaceable, nothing we ever do will bring her back, but we have hope that justice will prevail and her killer will be held responsible for this heinous crime. Ever since then, for the past 6 months, I and my family have been campaigning tirelessly and advocating for there to be an independent investigation, for there to be action. Those killings cannot continue, and expect the world to turn the page and not hold anyone accountable. Therefore, this commission of inquiry is really important, and this public hearing is important for us to look at the full range of violations committed against Palestinians. Shireen was a well-renowned Palestinian American journalist who was reporting on these crimes and the violence that the Palestinians were experiencing on a daily basis. But she was also part of this struggle as she was a Palestinian herself. Her killing is not a separate incident, but a part and parcel of the entire system that continues to perpetuate this type of violence. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lina, for your testimony. You said you reacted with shock. You never expected that Shireen would be shot. Now, why is that? Did you feel that there would be the usual protection for journalists and that the rule to protect journalists will be observed by those carrying weapons?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I was very shocked also because, one, as you said, she's a journalist. She was wearing her protective helmet, her vest, and Shireen was always known to practice caution. She's never put herself in direct danger. She's never put herself in any risky situation, nor herself nor her crew and her team. She would, whenever they were asked to leave a certain area, she would always leave. She never wanted to put herself in danger. But even with the vest and the helmet, she was still targeted. And even though she was always cautious, she was still targeted. She was not in a... what was shocking is that she was in a quiet area. There was nothing happening in that specific scene. And we've seen videos of how she was merely walking with few of her other colleagues. So that was clear, it clearly showed that she was targeted and it was deliberate. That's why it was very shocking. And at the end of the day, we expect that all the mechanisms in place and all the policies made to ensure that journalists are protected are being implemented. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case in Shireen.
Thank you for your response. I now hand over to the commissioners. And just a gentle reminder that we have time constraints. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Ms. Abu Akleh. I had a couple of questions. One of the sort of allegations made is that there was activity by armed Palestinians in the region. Was that the case, or?
That's referring to in Jenin. We saw all the evidence, and all reputable organizations and media outlets conducted investigation, and even the most recent one from the forensic architectures team. They all showed that there was nothing happening in that region. And even the Israeli army has, until this day, refused to release the body cam footage from that scene. It was clear that Shireen was merely there, and she had identified herself to the army. And it was not the first time that she was in Jenin or in that specific area, as a matter of fact. So all evidence clearly shows that Shireen was merely there to report, and she was just practicing her right to press. So any other claim about Palestinian militias being present is not true.
I also wanted to ask you, why do you think, we know that Israel has not carried out a formal investigation. I mean, Shireen was a US citizen, well-known figure. Why do you think the United States has not launched a formal investigation?
I think that question should be directed to the U.S. Government for a better answer.
In the work that you and your family have done, and others who have assisted you in carrying out investigations, in collecting the footage from different angles. Do we know the names of any of the soldiers or any of the commanders who were responsible for the brigade at that time?
No, we don't know. We don't have any names, even though the Israeli army, they know the soldier, but they haven't released the names, and nor any of the people in the chain of command.
Thanks very much, Ms. Abu Akleh, for the statement that you've made, which is very informative for us. If I could first just go back and follow up one of the questions that Commissioner Kothari asked. What information do you have about any actions taken by the United States? We will certainly follow up with the United States, as you have suggested, and in fact have already sought from the United States any information they have relating to Shireen Abu Akleh's death. But what information do you have as to actions taken by the United States?
I don't have any information with that regards. It's just the statements we've seen that they had released previously, but I don't have information
Nothing
on that.
more?
No.
Okay.
But you met with Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State. What did he say?
Yes. Yeah, we met with the Secretary of State, and we told him that it's important that accountability requires action, and he said that they're committed towards accountability, and that's all that we have at this point.
Okay. I should add as well that we certainly have asked the United States for information. We have also asked the Israeli government for information. As you say, there is body cam footage, presumably, and that's one thing that certainly should be released. So we will be pursuing that issue. Could I go to the day of the funeral, and the events preceding it? You mentioned that the Israeli police had requested, I think you said, or asked for Palestinian flags to be not displayed. Was that a request, or did they put it as an order?
It was more of like a request, and when they saw that the Palestinian flag was draping her casket, that's when, even before then, but they made sure to attack the pallbearers and the mourners to take out the flag. And this is their way of intimidation, harassment, and to suppress any form of Palestinian national identity. They didn't want that to be displayed in public.
And when they made the request, did they indicate in any way whether they would take action if the request was not met?
I don't recall, because all these were conducted with my father. But either way, they did take action, and
yes,
we saw the brutality and the violence that followed after.
Right. Were there any other specific requests that they made?
They didn't want there to be any gatherings outside of our house, and they didn't want any national chants. And again, we made it clear that we cannot control the number of people coming to pay their respects, as this is not just a funeral for our family, but everyone was there to mourn her. And we cannot limit the number of people coming to pay their condolences. So again, we did not agree to any of their, we didn't do any agreements with them or state that, yeah, we will do this or that. It was merely us telling them that this is how we want to mourn Shireen.
I saw one report that it had been agreed that the coffin would be transported by a hearse and not carried. Was that request made, and was it agreed, if so?
Again, we did not agree to anything with them. We just merely stated the path of the funeral and the procession and how it would go on the day of.
Right. Was there any request that the coffin not be carried?
Yeah, they were trying to put a lot of constraints. They also didn't want the coffin to be carried from the church to the cemetery, but we did not agree to that, as it's merely a walking distance. But again, they were trying to they wanted all these requests so they could avoid any public gatherings or people being there and mourning Shireen, because they didn't anticipate the number of Palestinians who will be at the funeral.
which was surprising. The size of the funeral was no surprise to me. I'm sure it was of no surprise to you and your family. And yet you think it was a surprise to the Israeli police.
Of course, I don't think they anticipated that kind of a reaction, and to see the number of people present. And it's because at the end of the day, Shireen she's a female journalist, she's Christian, so they didn't think that it would cause this outrage or an outburst, but it proved otherwise.
Perhaps an indicator of shortcomings by Israeli intelligence. Was the issue raised about the presence of non-Christians at the funeral or in the church or at the hospital? Was this raised with your family?
It wasn't raised directly with us, but I know people who came up to me and asked me and told me that they had to present their IDs to show that they are either Christian or Muslim, or if they would ask them, what's your name? And according to their name, they would tell them, oh, well, you're Muslim, you cannot enter the church.
But the church itself was open to the presence of Muslims at the funeral?
Of course, the church is always open to the presence of anyone and everyone. So, no, these restrictions were coming only from the Israeli police.
So not from the family, not from the church?
No. We had no restrictions. Everyone and anyone was welcome to be at the church. And we saw the church was overflowing with people coming to pray, to pay their condolences. So we never put any restrictions on anything or anyone.
During the scenes outside the hospital, I think they're the ones that most of us would have seen on TV afterwards. During those scenes, or subsequently on the way to the church or at the church, did your family have any discussions about the situation with senior police officers who were present? Or basically did the police stay right away from the family in terms of trying to calm the situation? I mean, I know that they were near the family because I saw that in the video. But did they discuss with the family how the situation could be calmed?
No, they didn't. Not that I'm aware of. No, they didn't discuss anything. They were just there to try to attack the funeral and to prevent mourners from making their way to the church from the hospital. Because a lot of people couldn't make it to the church afterwards, they blocked all the roads. So they didn't try to calm the situation. On the contrary, they exacerbated it.
When the police came to see your father before the funeral, did they identify themselves, and does your father know the names of the police officers and their rank when they came?
I'm not sure, no. I don't have information.
Right. Would you be able to speak to your father on our behalf and provide us, if he has any recollection or information about the identity of the police officers who came and spoke to him, we would be grateful to receive that at some point.
Yes, of course, I can ask him.
Thank you. After the service in the church, the coffin was carried to the cemetery. Was there further difficulty with the police between the church and the cemetery?
At that point, with the amount of people present, we didn't have any difficulties. On the contrary, I think it was definitely a moment that will always be remembered by Palestinians, and everyone saw there were so many Palestinians who were going to the cemetery, but it's very hard for me to remember that moment.
It's a very traumatic time.
It was very traumatic. There are certain moments that I can't remember, but I'm not sure if there were any other incidents or other people who faced difficulties from the Israeli police. But all I remember is there were tens of thousands of people.
Do you remember whether there was still a police presence between the church and the cemetery?
Oh yes, of course. There were so many present around the area. They were all over, definitely so many of them. That I can remember really well.
It's not as though after the chaos at the hospital, the police presence was withdrawn so that the funeral could proceed?
No, they were still there. They were there for sure.
Right. And after the burial itself, were people able to leave the cemetery peacefully and without any difficulty from the police?
Yeah, once the funeral completed and everyone was able to leave back the cemetery.
Has your family had any contact with the police since the day of the funeral?
No, we haven't had.
So there's been, I mean, I saw that the police say that they were conducting an investigation into what happened that day, but there has been no senior police officer, no investigator contact your family, speak to your father, speak to you about the family's view, perspective on what happened that day?
No, nothing. No one has reached out to us ever since the day of the funeral.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Abu Akleh, I'm sorry to keep taking you back to those days, but I wanted to ask, the foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell of the EU, said he was appalled by the scenes at the funeral. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has said he was deeply troubled. Has there been any action or any contact with the EU or the European countries or the US about anything that they're doing about what happened in those days?
We haven't heard anything back. Again, we want to see all these words to be followed by action, and until this day, we haven't heard anything from the EU. But we've seen how supportive they've been in this case. But other than that, we haven't seen any action.
Thanks very much, and once again, apologies for taking you back to those days. You have one more.
Yeah, I'd like to go forward to your presentation of the complaint at the International Criminal Court. And that event obviously received a lot of attention again. What has your family asked the International Criminal Court to do, and what, if any, response have you had from the court at this stage?
Until this day, we haven't received any response or any feedback. We submitted the petition, the complaint, for them to investigate the crime of killing Shireen, a journalist. But until this day, there hasn't been any response, and we're still waiting to hear back.
The court has its processes,
yes,
and so that's not surprising, and I'm not being critical, but
yeah.
If your family in future receives any response from the court that you're able to communicate to us, we'd be pleased to hear it.
Of course, for sure.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So, Lina, I'd like to take you back to the funeral scene where you said the Israeli police were tugging at the coffin, pulling the flag off. Can you tell us what they were saying?
I was not in that. I was not there because I was inside the hospital seeking shelter, so I can't answer on that. But from the videos I saw, they were attacking, also with the batons and violently pulling away the flag.
Yes. So can you hear on the video what they were saying as they were pulling this flag?
No, I can't hear. I didn't hear.
Who were the pallbearers? Did it include your father?
No, my father wasn't among the pallbearers. They were just Palestinian young men, people we know who were carrying the casket. And I know that one was hurt from the attack.
What is the general reaction of the population of Palestine to this killing of Shireen? From all accounts, we hear that she was a well-known journalist.
Yeah, this caused an outrage for all the Palestinians. Shireen entered the houses of millions of Palestinians for the past 25 years from a small TV screen, as she was the voice of justice, voice of Palestinians for, as I said, for 25 years. And everyone everyone who grew up during the second Intifada, that generation clearly remembers her, and it's a loss not just for our family but to the entire nation, as Shireen succeeded in humanizing the stories of Palestinians, but also for shedding light not just on the struggles that Palestinians face under occupation, but celebrating their successes, their accomplishments, and making sure that their stories are heard not just in Palestine but around the world. So it's a huge loss for our family, for Al Jazeera, and for the entire nation of Palestinians who grew up listening to Shireen and covering almost every event, every war in Palestine.
So thank you so much.
Navi, sorry, I had one more question.
Do you have to? We are under time constraints.
One very quick question, Navi, sorry. The pallbearers and the people who were around them in the procession when all this was happening with the police and army, were they able to identify any of the police or the army who were harassing them, pushing them around?
I'm not sure they were able to identify. It's very difficult to identify them.
Okay.
It's not easy because they don't have name tags. They were just there attacking.
And as far as you know, there's no investigation, even amongst the Palestinian Authority, anyone to try to identify those?
No, there hasn't been any investigation. The Israeli police, they said that they didn't fully admit guilt to what happened at the day of the funeral, but they did acknowledge what happened. But then again, they said they will not be opening any investigation, and they were in some way justifying this attack.
And can you just quickly tell us about the response of the Palestinian Authority to her killing and what happened afterwards?
Of course, they launched an investigation around the killing, of course, and which was done on international standards, and it showed that the bullets fired towards her direction were targeting her upper body, and we've welcomed this kind of an investigation as it showed really important evidence from that day.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
So, Lina, of course, we commissioners express our condolences to you and the family.
Thank you.
And so therefore, we're particularly grateful that you took the time to come and testify before this commission. Thank you for your effort.
Thank you.
Thank you. This brings us to a close of this session, and because of UN rules on closure of the building, we will have to proceed.
Navi, sorry, we have one more testimony today. It's the...
I know. Please don't interrupt me, Commissioner Qatari. I'm coming to that. Right, so to do the switch, we will just take a few minutes break, say 5 minutes, and we begin with the testimony of survivor Ali Shamdi. So you see, that's what I was coming down to. That because of time, we're not taking a big break, but just a few minutes, 5 minutes, no less, to make the switch.